Boker Tov. Today's daf is Daf Chaf Aleph in Gitin, as we learned for first time for Elizabeth ben Ruben and Yosef ben Chaim Michal. All right, yesterday we got down to the seventh line, let's call it Amarava. Amarava, Kosovo get must be at Abdo. Let's say he wrote her a get and he put it in the hands of his Eved Kanani. Because of Lashtar Matan Alav. Now we learned that Eved is Mukash, is juxtaposed to Karka, and is acquired the same way that Karka is acquired, that is Kesef Shtar Chazaka. Okay, either by cash or a shtar, writing a document, handing it over, or Chazaka, showing ownership. So let's say he put the get in the hands of his Eved, and he wrote a shtar, Matana, giving her the Eved with the get in his hand, anything in his pocket, whatever. Those are Matana love. Kanaso, she acquires the Eved. Umiskareshes he gave it to her. It says because of Laseva Graces for Nasam Biada. Yes, the rest of Laseva Graces for Nasam Biada put it in her hand, gave it to her, and he put it in the hands of Umiskareshes Bo. Says Gemara, why should that work by my Chotzer Malechasi? Why does when she acquires the Eved is like a chotzer, like her courtyard, and anything in her courtyard, it's like karka, right? Fine, but it's something that's movable. You can't acquire a chotzer maleches that way. Says Rashi, when you say that owning the chotzer, meaning it doesn't mean that you can't own the chotzer. It acquires something for you. Karka, which is movable, is different than karka, which is not movable, and this is effectively karka, which is movable. In other words, the question over here is not can she not acquire the Eved that way. Eved is like karka. So of course you could acquire the Eved with kesef shtar chazak, and this is with a shtar. The question is, can the Eved holding the get for her, can she acquire it that way? In other words, there's a rule that if I have a chotzer and you give it to me, right? Let's say you give me something into my chotzer, you pull it into my chotzer. Okay, the chotzer acquires it for me, even though I'm not there. The chotzer acquires it, it's my karka. So that's a way of acquisition also. But over here, the chotzer, if you call the Eved her chotzer is movable, and a movable chotzer does not acquire something else. I'm not talking about acquiring the Eved. The Eved she can acquire with the shtar. But how does the Eved holding the get, how does she acquire that? How does she get that? Is it because it's in her chotzer? For example, we'll see that, we mentioned many times, Minat Torah, a man could divorce his wife against her will, right? The rabbi said, you have to give it with her a consent. But Minat Torah, you could just throw it, give it to her, throw it in her lap, put it in her hand, stuck it in her hand, that's it. It's against her will. She's divorced. So we're going to talk about that. Why does the Eved work? Does it work because of shlichus or not? We're going to come to that in a minute. But that's the question. So again, if he wrote her a gift, she doesn't have to accept the gift, right? That you can't force her. But the get she could. The get you can force her into. So over here, where she accepted the Eved Kanani as a gift, and now the get is in his hand, how does she acquire the get? If it's because it's like the Eved is like her chotzer, but it's a chotzer which is movable, and a movable chotzer does not acquire it for you. If, for example, let's say he threw the get into her chotzer, and Minat Torah works against her will. If it's in her chotzer, it's like hers. It gave it to her already. The chotzer of a person acquires her even against her will in the case of a get. It's not a gift. You can say, if you throw a ball into my chotzer, I don't want it. But here, where the Torah says you can give it to her against her will, and you threw it into her chotzer, so she's divorced. But a chotzer maleches does not acquire. So that's the question. Okay, well, maybe he's not moving at that point. Maybe the Eved is standing. He's standing still. If it wouldn't work if he's walking, in other words, a movable chotzer doesn't count. And so if the Eved's movable, it doesn't work even if he's standing still. Because if he'd be walking, it wouldn't work. If he's standing or sitting, also wouldn't work. The hilchos is the kafus, like the Gemara says many places. If the Eved's tied up, and Tosfos adds on, if he's tied up and sleeping, if he's tied up and asleep, then it would work for him. But if the evidence moving around, then the fact that he has the get in his hand does not require it for her necessarily. It's not like you give it into her hand. We're not done with this. We're going to talk about why is that. Let's say he wrote her a get and she put it b'chatzero and he put it in his chutzner, not in her chutzner. We said before, if he wrote a get and he threw it into her chutzner, she owns that property, threw it into chutzner, she's divorced against her will. Menatorah. Okay, let's say he put in his chutzner because of l'shtar matana alav, and then he gave her a chutzner. He gave her the chutzner. He wrote her pardon? Star. With a star. He gave her a star. You could a chutzner, a karka is nikna b'kesser star chazaka. Gave her a star love. Okay, and that she has to accept willingly. She doesn't have to accept the chutzner. You give me a field, I don't have to accept it. Again, she has to accept even against her will. If he threw it into her, she could stand there and not accept it. Tie up her hands in it. But if he puts it into her lap or into her sticks it into her hand against her will, she's divorced. But over here, he wrote the get, put it in his chutzner, and he gave her the chutzner. So she's she acquires the chutzner, and she's thereby divorced. Now, what's the chiddush in that second case? Gemara says, you need both cases. Yesh min an eved. If you tell me eved, have min a dafke eved, avol chutzner, but a chutzner ligza mishum chatzer habo lach mikam. There's a famous case like this. Let's say he wrote a get, and he put it in Yankel's yard. Yankel went and sold the yard to her. Is she divorced thereby? No, because he didn't give it to her. The husband has to give her the get, or the husband's shliach has to give her a get. In this case, the husband was sitting one day writing a get, and he left it in Yankel's field, right? Yankel's chutzner, let's say. And then Yankel went and gave or sold the field to the chutzner to her. She's not divorced. That's called chatzer habo lachamikan. She got the chutzner afterwards. So you might think that even that in case of the chutzner, even if he put it in his chutzner and he gave her the chutzner, maybe that shouldn't work because it's similar to the case of Yankel, and she's not divorced in that case. She's still right. And in that case where she bought the chutzner or was gifted the chutzner from Yankel, she's not divorced. If she goes and marries somebody else, that's adultery. So you might think in a case where he put it in his chutzner and he sold her the chutzner, gave her the chutzner, also shouldn't work. Kamash, well, no, that's not like the case of Yankel, and that does work. If he gave her the chutzner, he gave her the get within it. But in the case of Eved, an Eved, it shouldn't work. Again, we said it only works in the case of the Eved, that if he gives her the Eved after he stuck the get in the Eved's pocket, he gave her the Eved. It only works if the Eved is tied up and asleep, so he's not movable. So you might say, well, even if he's tied up and asleep, it should have to be her to be divorced, even when he's not tied up and asleep, or if he's tied up and not asleep, or if he's asleep and not tied up. And you might think that she's divorced then too, and she's not, and she would there commit adultery. Kamash one, we're not gozer. So therefore, if he gives her an Eved and it gets in his hand, in the hands of the Eved or his pocket or whatever, and the Eved's tied up and asleep, she's divorced. And the same thing if he put the get in his chutzner and he gave her the chutzner, she's divorced. Amar Abaya. So now we come to your question. Why does a chutzner work? Why does a chutzner work? Why do you put it in a chutzner? It says v'nasam al sefer creases v'nasam biyada. You put it in her hand. So why should it work if you put it in her chutzner? The chutzner's not. Is chutzner in her hand? A chutzner is like an extension of her hand. Right? What is her body? Her chutzner is like an extension of that. Just like her hand works, whether it's with her knowledge or without her knowledge, whether she agreed to accept it or you just stuck it in her hand, you stuck it in her pocket or in her lap, that works, right? So maybe by chutzner also, it should work, right? It should work only if it's meaning if she owned the chutzner and you threw the get into her chutzner, like we have cases like that in the Gemara, then she's divorced, whether she willingly accepted it or you forced it, you threw it into her chutzner. She owns a chutzner, she can't say I don't accept it. But over here, but in this case, where he wrote the get and he put it in the hand of the he wrote the get and put it in his chutzner, and then he gifted her the chutzner or sold it to her. She doesn't have to accept the chutzner. There's no law that you have to accept it. Right? You're not supposed to accept gifts. Better not to accept gifts. She doesn't have to accept it. So why should it work? Right? So over here, why should that work? There's a question. Chutzner works. Why? Because of a yad. Well, yad works whether it's willingly or against her will. So the same way the chutzner should work willingly or against her will. That means if she already owned the chutzner, but over here, she doesn't necessarily have to accept the chutzner. He put the get in his chutzner. She doesn't have to accept it. And this is a matana where he gave it to her. So maybe this chutzner shouldn't work. Masal Shimi Barashi, shlichus lekabbalah. I'll tell you another case. What about a shliach for a kabbalah? What is shliach for kabbalah? A man can make a shliach to give the get, right? We talk about how maybe get Medina Siyam. Well, who's that? He sent the get with somebody with a shliach, right? He could send the shliach. That's called the shliach l'halacha. Shliach to take the get. She can also designate a shliach to accept the get for her. So if shliach number one gives it to shliach number two, they're divorced, right? Even though she's not there. So he says shlichus lekabbalah is also only midaita. You can't force her to accept the shliach. Let's say you force her to say, this guy has to be your shliach. You have to have a shliach over here, and he's going to accept you. Like the husband says, I want to divorce you. You went to Kalamazoo. I'll tell you what, here's my shliach, and I'm designating this guy as your shliach. Can't do that. She has to designate a shliach. So shlichus lekabbalah is also midaita sabal karchalesa b'kahavi shliach lekabbalah. What do you think that it only works? You're saying chutzner shouldn't work over here. Why? Because the chutzner she doesn't have to accept. The whole idea is chutzner works because of a yad, just like the yad is willingly or bal karcha. The same thing, the chutzner has to be that way. And here, where the chutzner was given to her and she doesn't have to accept it, maybe it shouldn't work. So he says, what do you mean? Shlichus lekabbalah also, it only works with a das. It doesn't work bal karcha, and she's still shlichus lekabbalah. In other words, you don't have to have. Yes, she can be divorced against her will, but not every. What's the word? Not every engine for accepting the get, be it a chutzner or be it a shliach, has to be something that's against her will. It doesn't have to be something that could even be against her will. The chutzner could be something if she accepts it, fine, just like the shliach, if she accepts it. Abaye, who asked the kasha, Abaye who asked the first kasha, right? Abaye said, well, the chutzner shouldn't work over here because this chutzner is not bal karcha. Abaye atu shlichus miyadis, Rabbi. Shliach is not because of a yad. Yad works bal karcha or against her, either bal karcha or willingly, fine. But shlichus doesn't work with that. Shlichus is because it says v'shilach v'shilcha. It's Rabbi. It's more in Kedushin, beginning of the second parak there. Then it says v'shilach is send, and it says v'shilcha, right? And that's actually to teach me that she can make a shliach over here. So that's based on a pasuk. It has nothing to do with yad. Yad has to be willingly or bal karcha, but shliach doesn't have to be that way. So what do you compare them? Or I could tell you shlichus lekabbalah nami ashkan bal karcha. I'll tell you no, that's not a kasha for shlichus. You ask me, Rashi says, but shlichus kabbalah only works midata, and yet she could be divorced. Shliach lekabbalah will also we find. A shliach kabbalah is also you find that it can be bal karcha. Shekain av mekabel get lebito kana bal karcha. A father can be a shliach for his daughter, who is a young daughter, against her will, right? If she's a father can accept the get for his daughter, right? If she's still a tana against her will, he can accept it for her. Avia makabel gita can often miksubas. Rashi says miyasa v'haisa, that a young girl, not a bas mitzvah, but if she's not bas mitzvah yet, the father accepts it for her, so he can be a shliach kabbalah b'karcha too. Therefore, his kasha is not such a kasha either because he said Abaye takes issue and he says, well, this shouldn't work in the case of the chutzner because the chutzner over here is not bal karcha, and in general, get has bal karcha. Shimi says, what about shlichus lekabbalah? That's not bal karcha, and yet it works. So Abaye will say, no, either shlichus is learned out from shlichus, it's not because of yad, or because shlichus is not is shliach lekabbalah, or shlichus, but you do find this bal karcha in the case of the father. So he could still use his argument and say, even if shlichus is because of a yad, or it's because of the pasuk, either way, it could work bal karcha, whereas the chutzner should only work if it works bal karcha. And here, where she accepted the chutzner, right, it only worked because the get was in the chutzner and she accepted it willingly, maybe it shouldn't work. So Abaye has that issue with the case before, but still, it's mashma that from the Gemara, they kasel get but asam b'chaser, but kasel shtamatana, that it would work, and she is divorced. So you asked before, what was the question you asked before? Oh, can an Eved Kanani be a shliach? Yeah. An Eved Kanani is like a woman, and she could be a shliach over here too, as we'll see. Shiur, the mission is going to say, we had it before, that she could even be a shliach for her own get. She could be a shliach for her own get. So the Gemara is going to say, right? She could bring the get. We say maybe get Nessim could even be the woman herself. So you say, what do you mean? If she has the get in her hand, she's already divorced, right? No. Speaking of what he said, take the get to the court in, I'm now in Kenya, and please take this with you to Israel. Take it to the court. Give it to the court. And if the court, I designate the court to be a shliach to give it to you. So he's designating it that way, but she could be the shliach. Yeah, she can be a shliach for the get. All right. We'll talk about other people being a get, being a shliach also. So the Mishnah said that you can write a get on a leaf of a olive tree. Well, last night was at a wedding and we saw my son pointed out that the leaves are very small.
Micrography, I was thinking it yesterday already.
It's very small. They must have had big olive trees or something that you could write a whole get on a leaf of an olive tree. So Tosfos points out that it's only olives, not like onions and things like that, which are going to disintegrate quickly. Only things which could last. There's got to be something which onion skin. Yeah. But that lasted at least, or it didn't. But this was real onions or something like that. Thing that's going to disintegrate certainly would not be any good. Right. So he says, so what again? Let's look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah said on Daf Yomi, right, that you can write it on a Olshos eyes, you can write it on the horn of a para, of a cow or a bull, whatever, and you give it. But also it's a para. I don't know. Do female cows have horns? I don't know, huh? Yeah, maybe they do. Okay, so they have horns. Or doesn't make sense. Al Yad Shavar, write it on the hand of the Eved and give her the Eved. Okay, so Al Shozayit. So Bishlam Yad the Eved, I understand you can write it on the hand of the Eved. Lo Efshamixi, you can't cut it off. Obviously, you have to give her the whole Eved. Ela Karen Shapara, why does he have to give her the whole para? Write it on the Karen, write it on the horn. We could say let it cut off the horn, but let's go and give it to her. Amakra, this is the pasuk we had mentioned this before. The pasuk says, because of the nasan law, you have to write it and give it to her. Misha and Mechusar Alexiva Nasina. If you need another action in between, you need to do some other item in between writing it and giving it. In this case, you have to cut it off. Excluding this, where you wrote it, cut it off, and give it to her. It doesn't mean to say that. It means to say that. Tosfos says a whole issue here about. He says dafka is something like balachayim or something which is muchaber lekarka, which grows. That you're changing something from its natural growth. In other words, the horn of a cow, or you write it on a leaf of a tree which is attached to the tree. Right, or on the tree, and you cut off the tree. So then you did something, you did an action between writing it and giving it. It has to be where you write it and you give it with no other action necessary to separate them. So that's, then you could do it, correct. Right? You have to write it, you have to write it, you have to do it on something where you're writing it and giving the whole thing. So if you write it on the horn of the cow and give her the whole thing, fine. So there's nothing, no other action was necessary in between. Doesn't mean that action was required, but you did an action in between. If it's if you wrote it on the horn and then you cut it off in between, that's no good because you can't do any action in between. So that's the point. It's not necessarily which is necessary. You might say, is it necessary? It's not necessary to cut off the horn. You can give it the whole cow. But if you do cut it off, is that okay? No. It only works if you gave it to her, if you wrote it, you gave it to her. If you had to do if you did some other action in between, that's no good. And Tosfos says an argument, Tosfos says a whole discussion about, well, what happens if you had a gigantic parchment and you wrote it on the first half and then you cut it off? Is that okay? Well, then you wrote it, you did an action in between, and then you gave it afterwards. So that's not considered an action because it's not, if you didn't disrupt something from its natural growth, like taking a horn off a cow, or taking or ripping a leaf off a tree, something of that sort, where you cut it off from its natural position. But there's other Rishonim disagree. Tosfos brings down a whole discussion about that. Okay, so that's the problem. That's why the Mishnah said you write it on the hand of an Eved and give her the whole Eved, or you write it on the horn of a cow and give her the whole cow. Right, give her the whole cow. Also or anything else. If you wrote it on a leaf of a tree would be, if you gave her the whole tree, that would be okay. But you have to give her the whole tree, meaning you have to give her the karka, etc., as it stands. Rav Yosef says you can't write it on the hand of any living thing. Rav Yosef says not on food. What's his reasoning? My time, he says, my time, it says safer. Because because of a safer creases, only a safer, it's got to be a book, parchment, something, not parchment necessarily, anything, pardon, a scroll, something that you can write on. But how do you know it doesn't have to be dafka, paper of some sort? It could even be on anything. If Kosovo, write it. As long as you wrote it, it's okay. Safer, only is safer. Why is it? Since it's the Kosovo, that teaches me anything. It came out to safer. Why safer? So what's more safer? If it's the Kosovo, you can write it on anything. And apparently, you can write it on who knows what. A block, a stone, whatever. Write it on something and give it to her. I'll safer, just like a safer is not living. It's not a food stuff. I've called them it's got to be something where there's no living spirit in it, right? That doesn't breathe, and no rechaim v'enoch, it's not a food. So you can't write it on food, as we said, on food or on a cow, right? That was Rav Yosef's point. You cannot write it on a evet and give it to her, nor on a leaf of a tree, because that's like food, or it's something like call that living. I don't know. Maybe would he argue about all shazas kedush para? Rav Sigli says my time. Rav Sigli argues. Is he arguing also on the? He's arguing on the para presumably, or on the evet. Maybe he's only arguing on the para. I don't think he considers the zayis a living thing, but it could be it's considered like a food. Okay, so therefore,
the language here is like cloud product cloud, but there's no second cloud.
Yeah, in a way, yeah. Or it's right. Right. You could say, but he doesn't. The Gemara doesn't say that. The Gemara just says kasav means everything, and safer is a part. Right. There's no safer. Safer is coming to exclude that. Right. It's like that. Kasav law means anything, and safer means it's got to be though like that. So it's a klal prat ain b'klal alamashu. But you could say ain b'klal alamashu b'prat. What does that mean? Right. It's got to be something. Right. It means everything, but it's got to be something like klal prat. It's only a safer. Right, and not so much. The Gemara doesn't say that. So that's okay. Rabbanan who say you could write it on the hand of an eved or on the horn of a animal. Rabbanan iksiv bas sefer. If it would say write it in the sefer or on the sefer, you're right. It's got to be right on the sefer. It's got to be like a sefer. It doesn't ein bo ruchaim ben ochel. Hashdichsiv sefer. The fact that it's a sefer, the sphere Svarmhuda says, coming to tell me, you got to write a story over here. I'm divorcing you and never want to see you again. You're totally removed from me. You're not married to me in any form. It's telling you a story. That's what you'll see. That's what you have to write in the get. I'm divorcing you from everybody, and from me, and you're mutter to marry anybody else. So that's what the sefer is coming to tell you. It doesn't say bas sefer. It's talking about what you write it on. He's telling you because of sefer, you have to write a story. For a bun high because of my other. So what do I do with because of? If sefer means sphere dvarim, so what does kasav teach me? Now we understand it's a double pasha today that you divorce a wife with a get. How do you marry her? With a ring, right? You give her something. But we understand that today. But who says what? Where do we get that from? So you say, because it says because of. He has to be divorced only with something writing. Then can't go with money. Maybe you think you give her money. Sometimes I might think, she will go out and she will get married to somebody else. So there's Yitzia leaving you and getting married to somebody else are written right next to each other. Mahabaya b'kesef, just like getting married is with kesef shtar bia. Af Yitzia is not with kesef. Maybe give her money. Give her $100 and say, get out of here. And maybe that she's the one. No, you didn't pass it. Pasuk teaches me, safer, the kosev, it has to be writing. Safer teaches me just sphere svarim. But kosev teaches me it's got to be writing. Be'idach. Okay, how will Rav Yossi Aglili know that? He says, "Mi sefer krisis," because it says together sefer krisis. Yes, you're right. Sefer, he says, it means dav shem b'rachaim ben ochel. It says sefer krisis. That's sefer korsa ve'dav racha korsa. Only a sefer. The fact that it says sefer next to krisis doesn't mean a sefer cuts her off, removes her from the marriage, nothing else, only a say, what other button? He says, if Susan says creases, it says it's got to be something which totally cuts her off. For example, somebody mentioned this the other day. I'm giving you a get on the condition that you never drink wine forever. On the condition you never go to your father's house forever. Ain't that creases. That's not cutting off. Why? Because she's tied to him forever. At any time in her life. And Tosa says, even if her father dies, it's still her father's house, his children are still called Beis Avich. And drinking wine should be forever. So if you say, I'm divorcing on the condition that you never drink wine again the rest of your life. Well, she's 119 years old and she drinks wine. The divorce is no good. It's not there. So that's not cutting her off. If he says, okay, 30 days, that's a good creases because 30 days is manageable, right? That after 30 days, I'll be cut off if she drinks after is okay. So that's what you need safer creases for, right? So he says, Rabbanan said that safer creases, right? Come on, nothing is safer creases, safer cuts her off, and nothing else cuts her off. Whereas the Chum said the Kosav teaches me it's got to be written. Rabbi Yossi says that's some safer creases. The Rabbanan say no, that says it's safer cars and nothing else. What about Rabbi Yossi Glili? Now the Yidach Mikaris creases. He says right. He says that I know, right? Because how do I know that Rabbi Yossi learned safer creases? Tell me safer course. So how does he know this business that it's got to be something which totally cuts her off? It can't be conditional about something that might take place in 50 years because it could have said safer kares and it says safer krisus. Kares means to cut off, just like the punishment of kares, right? Cuts them off before the age of 60. You're also cutting off from the marriage. That says krisus. That expert teaches me this idea too. V'idach kares krisus lo dash. The Rabbanan don't darshan kares krisus. There's no difference between the word kares and krisus. They don't have that drasha. So they all hold of the same halacha that you can't give her a condition that's going to stay, it's going to keep her tied to him in some way forever. That doesn't work. And they both agree that only a get cuts her off. The machlokus over here is, can you use something, can you write it on like a live person, like a eved or an animal and give her the animal, or on a food stuff? Can you write it on something which is last? Well, I would assume that means a leaf also is like a food stuff. It could be eaten, whatever. If it's something, if it would last, if it doesn't last, we said before Shem say you can't write it on an onion skin and it's going to disappear. It's going to disintegrate in a few days. That's no good. Now here we come to the point you just mentioned before, Moshe, about you said you can't write it. If you say you can't write it on a horn and give her and cut it off, but you can cut it off first. So the Mishnah says you don't write a get on something with chubal karka. You shouldn't do that, right? You shouldn't do that. Now we said before, if you wrote him chubal karka, let's say, and then he gave her the karka, gave her the chutzner, right? We said before that would work, right? But so we'll see what the Mishnah means. Let's say he wrote him chubal karka, tol showed, then he cut it off, the chasmo, and then he signed it afterwards. He had it signed afterwards. V'naslot's kosher. Now why would that work? Why would that work? He's not supposed to write it. There's something in between here. He wrote it, then he cut it off. That we said before. If you wrote it and then cut it off, did an action in between, that shouldn't be good. So the Gemara is going to explain this. Rabbi Yehuda says, like we understood till now, it's no good until the writing and the signatures have to be after it's been detached from the ground, like we said before. You don't write on erasable or erased paper, because if the paper's been erased and then signed, let's say you wrote it on erased paper, was been erased before, and they signed it on that too, then it's very easy to erase it again and then write something else in its place. So you can have, there might have been a condition, there might have been something in there, right? A divorcement condition, you give me $100. It doesn't give her the $100, something of that sort. So he might erase, or she might erase the condition, and you can't tell. So you don't write on erasable or erased paper. Well, diphthera. Diphthera is a kind of a parchment that's not processed as much as Sefer Torahs will see. Because it could be forged. The Chum say that it's okay. We'll see why the Chum machia, because they say it all depends on Edom Asir. That's really Rabbi Lev's Shita. Kasva Mechuber. Okay, so the Gemara is like this. Kasva Mechuber We said in the Mishnah, you're not supposed to write on Mechubal Karka. Then he says, Chas, if you wrote it on Mechubal Karka and you cut it off and you signed it, it's okay. Why should that be okay? Custom Mechubal Karka, Reisha ain't custom. We said, you don't write on Mechubal Karka. We said before that you have to, it has to be Kasav and Asan, not where you need some other action in between. Here's what we mean. If you wrote it on the Mechubar, you only wrote the boilerplate. You wrote the part, the words, not the name, and not the names and the date and the cities that they're from. That's the Torah. That's the exchangeable part, the part that has to be Lishma. So we asked me, if you're not supposed to write it, you're not supposed to write it. The Mishnah was this: if you wrote it, but you didn't write, you left out the name, the place of the names, the main part of the get. You left that out. You just put on the boilerplate. That's okay. That's okay. It only is okay if you left that part out. You wrote that after you detached it. Again, it's only good if you left off the place of the Torah before you before you cut it off. In other words, when you wrote it on the Mechubal Karka, you only had the Tofes, not the Torah. You cut it off and then you wrote the Torah. Rabbi Lazar goes like Rabbi Lazar. Damei Masir Karti. Okay, very good. So he says you left off the Torah, and Rabbi Lazar says Damei Masir Karti. Valakamar. It goes like Rabbi Lazar. That we paskin like him. That the main part of giving get is in front of it. Valakamar. Ain Kosvin Tofes. Here's what it means. You shouldn't write any part of the get while it's attached to the ground. Why? Shemiach of Torah, because if you start to write the boilerplate, you might come to write the names too. Kosful of Tofes. Let's say you wrote the Tofes, the Tosha, but you cut it off a Kosful of Tofes, then you wrote the Torah, the Nasan, when you gave it to her. That's kosher. Why? Because according to Rabbi Lazar, when it says for Kosav law, Kosav is going on the Torah, right? That's the key. The Kosav, that's okay, because that's going on the Kosav, writing on the Kosav. So that's okay. And then you gave it to in front of Adam, that's kosher. Reish Lakish Amar, Chasmu Shanina. No. You know when he says Vakasvu, you wrote it afterwards? Kasvu Mechubar is not going on the writing, it's going on the signatures. Because he learns Vakasvu is going on the signatures. He learns Eideh Chasimakashir. The main part is not giving it in front of Adam. You don't have to give it in front of Adam. Remember, Rav Meir says that the Iker is the signing. The signing has to be after it's Talish. We said the Kosav and Nasan. You can't have anything between the Kosav and Nasan. Kosav is not going on the writing of the get. The writing of the get could be a Mechubar. You wrote a get, you cut it off, you sliced it off, right? You sawed it off. Then you signed it after it was detached. That's okay, right? You shouldn't write even the Torah because we're afraid maybe you'll sign it while it's attached. But let's say you wrote the whole get except for the signatures. Tosha, you cut it off chasmu and then you signed it after it was detached. The nasmal kosher, it goes like Rav Meir. Okay, so we have machlokas between Rabbi Lazar and Rav Meir. Again, according to Rabbi Lazar, the main, and we pass like him, it has to be given in front of two Adam. Just like you go to a wedding and there has to be two Adam there that make it. If you don't give it to in front of two Adam, she's not married. Don't give her to the get in front of two people. She's not divorced. It has to be in front of two kosher Adam. And according to Rabbi Lazar, you really don't need signatures on the get at all. It's just like a midrabani. You should put signatures on there in case you can't find the Adam Asir. The key is the Adam who are there at the time that it's given over. According to Meir says no. Adam don't have to be there at the time. Yes, we have Adam there, but the main part is that they're signed on it. Let's say you wrote it on a earthenware vessel of a flower pot, and the flower pot had a hole in it, right? That it could get nourishment from the ground. That's kosher. Why? The shakal biyavla nilei. The chiddush is even though it's sort of attached to the ground, not really attached to the ground, right? It's just got a hole there to get nourishment. You can give it the flower pot. Let's say run a flower pot. Give it the whole flower pot. Let's say you wrote it on a leaf of a flower pot that's got a hole in it. A pot, it's got it's perforated on the bottom. Abayo makosher. Abayo says it's kosher of our apostle. Abayo makosher. Why is kosher the shakal biyavla? Because you took the whole flower pot and gave it to her, like we said before. If you wrote it on a flower pot and gave it to her, it's okay. And if you wrote it on the leaf of a flower pot and gave it to her, it's also okay. Rava Amar Pasuk Gzeira Shem Yaktam. Here's the problem. We're afraid maybe you'll cut off the leaf and give it to her. You won't give her the whole flower pot. And if you cut it off in between, as we said before, you'll cut off the Allah Bahavi Ketzitza B'no Mechuber. and that's attached to mechuber. Interesting. So from Rashi, it's mashma ketzitza on a mechuber. But if it was ketzitza from something which is not mechuber, like we said before, let's say you had a gigantic sheet of paper, and you wrote the get on half, and then you cut it off the bottom half. You wanted to save the paper for something else. Mashma that it would be good. That's one of the sheets that Tosfos brings down. Others disagree. That's the discussion we're having over here. So the key is when the Mishnah says ein kosim mechuber lekarka means, according to Rabbi Lazar, you shouldn't write it at all. And you shouldn't write any part of it, even the Tofes, because maybe you'll come to write the Torah. But if you wrote the Tofes and then you cut it off and you wrote the Torah afterwards, because that's going on, the custom, when the Torah says the custom is going on the writing, and that key is the Torah, and you gave it to her, then it's okay. According to Rav Meir, means you shouldn't write it because lest you come to sign it. But if you wrote it and you signed it after it was detached, that's okay, because when Pasuk says the custom, it's going on the signatures according to Rav Meir. According to Rabbi Lazar, it's going on the writing itself. And Rabbi Yehuda poslat should take sivas v'chsimasa v'talosh. So what's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion? So Rabbi Yehuda, that's Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, yeah, Rabbi Yehuda Meseir main kosmania. So Gemara is going to talk about Rabbi Yehuda Meseir, but what Rabbi Yehuda says, poslat should take sivas v'chsimasa v'talosh. He says they both have to be that way. So he's more machmer, and he says everything has to be v'talosh, even if it's, no matter what sheet deals, it's not clear if Rabbi Yehuda is going like Rav Meir or like Rabbi Lazar, right? Because he says, Rabbi Yehuda says, post-lat sheikh sivas b'talish, not clear. What does he mean by that? Doesn't mean, according to Rav Meir, the chasimasa for sure doesn't. It can't be Rav Meir, because Rav Meir says the chasima only has to be b'talish, but doesn't have to be b'talish at all. So apparently it's going like Rabbi Lazar, and he's like being machmer and saying it's puzzle, unless the entire thing is written. Not only the Torah is written after it's been detached, but even the Tofes also has to be written when it's before it's attached. That's apparently Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. So here now, tomorrow's Gemara is going to talk here about a flowered pot. We're talking about a flowered pot that's partially attached. It's like it's got it's perforated in the bottom, so it's like attached to the ground. And Abaya said, if you give her that whole thing, it's okay because you give her the whole thing. Rava says no, because you might come to detach it and it's sort of attached to the ground. If it wasn't perforated and wasn't attached to the ground, it's mashma that even Rava would say that it's okay. Here the issue is because it's got a hole in it. So tomorrow's Gemara is going to first off talk about if you have a flowered pot. The flowered pot is basically a movable item, and you acquire that by mashicha, by pulling it or lifting it or hadba. Whereas the dirt inside is karka, and that you acquire with kesef shtar chazaka, not with the mashicha. And we've learned many times that the Gemara is going to talk about that the chasim she'ein la machrayis, like movables, are acquired nechasim she'esh la machrayis because shtar chazaka. Meaning, how do you acquire land or an eved knani? Kesef shtar chazaka. Kesef means money. Shtar is shtar, handing a document over, handing a bill of sale or a bill of gift, or chazaka is showing ownership. That's what showing ownership. Whereas movables are acquired by picking them up or being mashicha or agbar or something of that sort. Now, if you have something movable and you want to acquire it and you're not around to good, for example, the case of chametz on Pesach, you're overseas and you have to sell your chametz, so you could give somebody 10 shekels and you sell them, or somebody gives you 10 shekels and you sell them a piece of a stone on your property, and then together all your chametz, which is movable, is sold together with the property, right? Even though you're not around, because you could do that with kesef. So that's one way to do things. So that's the concept of kesef. So it gets a little bit of a tangent about otzos before we get back into it. Let's stop here, and we'll wish everybody a good day. And let's see here.
Beautiful, thank you.